Hello everyone, welcome to another shmup topic video, and today's subject marks the beginning of Treasure Month, where I'll be playing and discussing a bunch of treasure games throughout the month. And today's topic is something I've been wanting to talk about for a very long time, and I thought today would be the perfect opportunity. But before we get into the topic proper, I want to give a little bit of a history lesson because I think it relates to today's subject well, which is back in the 1970s, a researcher by the name of Dr. Rosenhan decided to conduct a little experiment where he and his fellow researchers would pretend to have mental illnesses, fake hallucinations, things like that, to get themselves placed into mental institutions. And then once they were in there, they would see how long it would take and what the process would be like. If they reverted back to acting sane, how long they would be released. And what they found was, once you were deemed insane, everything you did was just a symptom of your insanity. It was actually incredibly difficult to prove your own sanity. And this is the same case when you take a shmup and you declare it a puzzle game. All of a sudden, everything about the shmup is now a puzzle element, and it becomes very difficult to prove, no, this is not a puzzle element, it is a shmup element, or it's just a general video game element. And so, before we get into the specifics of today's topic, and I talk about specifically why I don't think we should be going around calling Ikaruga a puzzle game for all time, I just want to give warning about this problem, because I can see the comment section very quickly falling into this trap of, well, if you think about it, aren't all shmups puzzle games? Well, if you think about it, aren't all video games puzzle games? Well, if you really think about it, isn't life just a puzzle game? I mean, it's really not that far of a step from saying Ikaruga is a puzzle game to all video games are puzzle games, in my opinion. And so now let's talk about specifically why this whole marketing spin of calling Ikaruga a puzzle game has grown to bother me over the years. The first thing is that the whole idea behind calling Ikaruga a puzzle game, at least in my opinion, is to help it with marketability, to help sell it to people who are non-shmup players. This is a very common tactic that you'll see throughout video game reviews, video game journalism, all that sort of stuff. I myself have engaged in this tactic because it's a very useful tactic when you're trying to sell and move a product that people don't understand by relating it to something that they do understand. For example, in my Radiant Silvergun review, I refer to Radiant Silvergun as the shmup RPG. The thing is, though, is that when I'm calling Radiant Silvergun the shmup RPG, I'm hoping people understand that what I'm saying is that it has some light RPG-inspired elements. I am not literally saying Radiant Silvergun is an RPG. The problem with the Ikaruga thing, though, is I have seen in many Discord conversations and many comments over the years and comments on videos I've made talking about not Ikaruga, but when Ikaruga comes up in the comment sections, people will say, well, isn't Ikaruga basically a puzzle game? I mean, is it really even a shmup? Like, people legitimately think the game is a puzzle game. It's not just a little bit of marketing spin. I think things have gotten a little too far. And so in this video, what I want to do is I want to break down why I don't agree Ikaruga is a puzzle game and why I don't think it is particularly more puzzle-like than many other shmups out there. And so I'm trying to root down where exactly this term came from, where exactly this belief came from. Is actually incredibly difficult because it is the internet, and as you saw in the opening sequence there, once a take is been took, it seems to catch on and people just will repeat it and regurgitate it, and actually becomes very difficult to decide who came up with this, why, what were they saying, what was their meaning. People will just say, you know, it has puzzle Twitch-like elements, they'll just throw that into their review. And so besides a concerning lack of originality in gaming journalism, it also makes it very difficult to track down the progenitors of these ideas and exactly what they were trying to say. I think the Eurogamer review is probably the one that's the most coherent and seems to have the most basis of what they're trying to say. So if you want to read that one, I think that one's probably the best to explain the whole puzzle thing. But what Eurogamer was saying was basically Ikaruga becomes a puzzle game because of the polarity mechanic. So all the other elements of the game, sure, that's a shmup, but once you stick a polarity mechanic in a shmup, boom, puzzle game, baby. I thought that was an interesting way to describe the game again for people who don't play Ikaruga. Of course, it's gotten so prevalent that even the marketing for Ikaruga itself on the Steam page will say something like puzzle elements, question mark, and I thought that question mark is kind of funny. Like, developers like, I guess it's a puzzle game. Sure, it's a puzzle game now. So in his review, he's mainly pinning down the polarity system as being the genesis of it being a puzzle game. But the interesting thing is that if you talk to people since then, people will point out other elements like, well, isn't the chaining system a puzzle game? Because you have to decide what order you kill things, and the way the enemy's laid out, it looks like a puzzle. And the problem with this is, once you start establishing these precedents for Ikaruga being a puzzle game, you really have to backtrack then and apply it to many other shmups, and all of a sudden, shmups are now becoming puzzle games. For example, Toho has many patterns and many elements that are very puzzle-like. And in fact, there is a pattern in Toho game, I think Fantastic Shooting Festival 2 or 1, where you're literally in a puzzle. So now Toho is a puzzle game, right? And with the chaining system, you could say, well, the strict chaining mechanics, that's like a puzzle because you have to sit down, you have to plan and route out your chains, right? That's how puzzles are, isn't it? But then you'd say, well, isn't Doronpachi a puzzle game? Isn't Ketsui a puzzle game? And now if you really think about it, isn't any highly difficult game where you need to sit down and plan out your routing, whether it's speedrunning, whether it's shmups, whether it's beat 'em ups, whether it's running guns, Metal Slug? Is Metal Slug now a puzzle game because you have to sit down and route out precisely where you stop, where you shoot, what you kill, when and why? This is the problem, that once you declare something a puzzle game, it becomes incredibly difficult to take that moniker off of it and to reel it back, because you could always sort of misconstrue things as being puzzle-like, because it's such just a nebulous, broad definition that's very hard to pin down. In fact, I went ahead and did a little bit of research for this. I thought, okay, let's get technical here. What is a puzzle game? What makes a game a puzzle game? And this is where things can get really out of control too, because I go to look up what is a puzzle game on Wikipedia and all the places, you know, there's not like an Oxford dictionary for these things. But I went to look, okay, what is a puzzle game? And in the definition, it's like, a puzzle game is a game with puzzle elements. It's like, okay, all right, we're defining a word with its own word. It's classic. Okay, so what is a puzzle game? This actually gets really hard to pin down as well, because even in the genre of puzzle games, this is where things can get a little blurry too, right? So for example, the classic puzzle game, the definitive puzzle game, has to be Tetris, right? That's like the whole genesis of the genre. So we can say, okay, Tetris is a puzzle game. It has these puzzle elements, but it also has these real-time reactive elements where you need to be able to react to things on the fly. But it's mostly about pattern recognition rather than knowing about all of these little inputs and routing and strategies. It's mostly pattern recognition. But then you start looking at stuff like Tetris Grandmaster 3, where they're doing these block rotation spins, and they're doing all these really technical things and playing the game invisible and all that. Then you start to say, whoa, okay, how far do you push the input action elements of a puzzle game before it's no longer a puzzle game? And I think that's honestly not to be decided. I'm not going to decide that. But I will say, if you start adding auto-scrolling and then a ship and then a hitbox, then you add enemies that spawn and boss fights and every other element of a shmup other than a polarity system in there, I think you can at that point declare it not a puzzle game anymore. And this is something that is particularly interesting with Ikaruga's case, because Ikaruga is a weird creature. I know a lot of shmup fans dislike Ikaruga for its popularity and its reputation, and to be honest, I was kind of in that camp for a few years where I was like, okay, do we always have to talk about Ikaruga? Is Ikaruga really the best shmup ever made? And you can see where I place it on my list of greatest shmups. I do consider it a fantastic, amazing, well-made shmup, and I do think it is a little bit of a victim of its own success, like I hope to be one day. So this is the interesting part. When it comes to placing it in the shmup pantheon, all these reviews say Ikaruga is barely a shmup. I mean, maybe you could call it a shmup, but it's like a Twitch puzzle shmup. You know, it's not necessarily a shmup, but it's also the greatest shmup of all time. So isn't that an interesting message that gaming journalists are sending? They're saying the greatest shmup of all time is the shmup that is mostly a puzzle game. And it's like, okay, so what about a pure shmup? Those just don't stand up. And I think that is sort of what people are trying to say, because whenever it comes to shmups, and whenever it comes to shmup discussion, this is again something that tends to annoy me with a lot of mainstream shmup discussion, is a lot of people are really eager to take what is a shmup and then morph it into something else to try and sell it and make it more palatable to people. But they're not really being honest, or they're not really being faithful to what a shmup is. For example, there's this NPR video that kind of annoys me too, where the guy talks about how shmups are meditative and enter a higher plane of being by playing a shmup. And I was watching that video and the whole time I was like, bro, what? I don't think I've ever sat and played a shmup and started, meditating. I felt many things while playing a shmup. Anger, anxiety, excitement, exhilaration, some bliss, I guess, when you're really deep into the flow state and all that sort of stuff. But again, I think calling shmups meditative, calling Ikaruga a puzzle game, these are all sort of symptoms of the same thing, which is that we don't really want to talk about the nitty-gritty mechanics of the genre. We don't want to talk about things like chaining system, level design, enemy design, boss patterns, stage layouts. All that stuff is way too boring. Instead, we want to come up with these big, grandiose sort of statements about the games that make them seem sort of magical and ethereal, and you're going to raise 10 IQ points by playing Ikaruga, and you're going to overcome your battles with anxiety by playing shmups or something. And so I just would really like a lot of shmup journalism and shmup discussion to be a little bit more grounded into what the genre actually is and what the gameplay is actually like, because I almost think it is sort of false advertising at times, where you get people showing up trying to play Dononpachi and trying to relax and enter their meditative states. It's like, I cannot think of a game more relentless, more brutal, more cold-hearted and evil than Dononpachi. That's what makes the game awesome. And so when it comes to me talking about shmups, I tend to like to emphasize the difficulty, the ruthlessness, the pain, the frustration, because that is what makes, this is another topic I'll have to make another day, but that's what makes the genre feel so visceral and real, rather than I'm playing Dononpachi and I'm floating on the clouds and fairy dust and angel eyes. So that's my sort of take on Ikaruga being a puzzle game. I think many of the elements could be considered reminiscent of puzzle elements, especially because it's made by Treasure. And if you look at other Treasure games like Radiant Silvergun, Treasure loves like very precise, very clean, very orderly boss layouts, enemy layouts. They do that through all their games, not just Ikaruga. And so that's what I'm saying, where you just add a polarity mechanic and then you look at the other design elements of Treasure games, and all of a sudden now it's a puzzle game, because you said, well, the polarity mechanic is like this secret puzzle element. One thing I also wanted to mention about the polarity mechanic before I get is Ikaruga is not the only shmup with a polarity mechanic. In fact, it's not the first shmup with a polarity mechanic. There is a Rising game that coincides with it, I think predates it a little bit, that also had a polarity mechanic, though I believe they were in development around the same time, so it's not necessarily Ikaruga copied it. You don't see people saying, oh, Dimmahu, that's a puzzle game. So I hope this clears up my thoughts, at least, on Ikaruga. I think it is a fantastic game. One of Treasure's best games. I do think Radiant Silvergun is better, at least in my personal opinion. But it is fantastic. It is precise. It is direct. It is well made. The game lets you know what it wants you to do and executes it very cleanly and very precisely. But in my opinion, precision, clarity, precise mechanics, that does not make it a puzzle game, because the primary function of playing Ikaruga, you still need to understand shmup mechanics, shmup concepts. You still need to be able to control the horizontal space, control the vertical space, be able to react in time with the auto scroll, just like you do with all shmup. And then you add in the extra mechanic of the polarity system. It's a new dimension of the gameplay, but that doesn't completely erase the other dimensions of the gameplay and become the primary way you play Ikaruga. Like, if you took someone who really understood the polarity mechanic, they would still need to know how to shmup somewhere in there in order to do well. So I hope that was interesting for you all. And please do like, subscribe, share with your friends, notify yourself, all that good stuff. It really helps out the channel. The channel's been growing a lot lately, and that makes me a very happy boy. So adios, everyone. So thank you to the $5 patrons: 172 PCT Water, Ukshay Wadker, Dingo, Another Joe, Anthony A, Aaron Solis, Ben, Borgie 22, Brian Reboot, Brian Shiver, Chris Yuzefovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Corio, Danielle Savage, Darren Griffin, Delta Tango 6, Disco Stas Leia, DJ 420 Praise It, Entropy, Eric H, FCK, Frank Carter, Full Set, Retro Shmupper, Geriatric, Don Maku, Hausu, Ilya, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Joe Angelo, John Kelly, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Kikoman 589, Larridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Maz, Minung, Mechlin, Mitch LY, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Okla Kugels, Philip Mason, Portal 63, Rattlecat, Raul, Real Skeen, Shen Sinzensky, SLW, The Boot Rex, The Real Ikuzo, The Old Bensta, TRM, Sugumo, Twilight, Ishi, Plasmo, and Yutsukaya. Thanks for watching.